program is the Active Center. It's created by David Sappe.
Pronounced Seppi.
Pronounced Seppi.
All right, so today we're going to deconstruct a pretty radical idea. The notion that to build a truly perfect society, the state needs to have total, absolute control. We're going to dig into the ideological blueprint that powered some of the most all-encompassing governments of the 20th century. So you have to ask, why? Why would any state want to exercise that much control over its own people? The answer isn't just a simple lust for power. No, it lies much deeper, inside a powerful ideology that literally promised to remake society from the ground up. Let's see how. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the core ideological blueprint itself. Then, we'll see how that idea was used to build the pillars of state control and something called a command economy. From there, we'll dive into the huge clash of values at the heart of this, and finally, we'll take a hard look at the historical outcome. Okay, so it all kicks off with one foundational goal. This is an idea rooted deep in Marxist-Leninist thought about how you can, fix the world's problems. At its absolute core, the ideology says this: private ownership of the things that create wealth, what they call the means of production, is the root of all evil. It's what causes class division, inequality, and the exploitation of workers. Now, it's really important to get a key distinction they made, at least in theory. The target here was the means of production. So big things like factories, farms, and natural resources. It was not about personal property. The idea wasn't to come and take your toothbrush. It was to seize control of the factory that makes the toothbrushes. However, in the real world, that line got very, very blurry. You see, to completely eliminate any potential for economic opposition, the state's control just kept expanding. It went way beyond factories. Soon, housing, food production, even transportation, all of it was brought under state control to centralize all economic power. So, what was the official justification for all of this? Well, it came from this really powerful concept called the dictatorship of the proletariat. This idea basically gave the ideological green light for a single party to centralize all power. It was framed as a necessary but temporary step to protect the revolution from its enemies and stop society from ever going back to capitalism. Okay, so you've got the theory down, but the next big question is, how does an idea on paper actually turn into absolute day-to-day control over people's lives? Well, that brings us to the pillars of state control. The logic is actually pretty straightforward. If you believe your path is the only correct one, then any challenge to that path isn't just a disagreement, it's a threat. And this way of thinking meant that individual freedoms weren't seen as fundamental rights, but as potential dangers to the whole revolutionary project. And as a result, you see the systematic dismantling of the very rights that allow people to disagree. Things like free speech, a free press, the freedom to get together. Because think about it, right? If you can't speak freely, or publish different views, or organize with other people, challenging the state becomes nearly impossible. And this right here is the heart of the political logic. The state's rationale is that if there is only one single correct path forward for history, then any other path, by definition, has to be illegitimate. It's seen as counter-revolutionary, and that's the justification for an absolute political monopoly. Now, this absolute political control doesn't just stop there. It extends directly into the economy, and it creates a system that operates on principles that are fundamentally different from any market-based economy. So instead of the invisible hand of supply and demand, you get the very visible hand of state planners. The whole economy is managed from the top down. The party sets a big economic plan, like a 5-year plan. Then they assign production quotas to all the state-owned factories and farms. And finally, the state itself decides how all the goods and services get distributed. But this creates a massive, ongoing issue that's often called the incentive problem. I mean, think about it. If there's no personal profit, no competition, and no real reward for doing a better job, what's your motivation to innovate or improve quality or do anything more than just the bare minimum to meet your quota? And the results of that problem were felt by everybody. This economic model often led to stagnation, chronic shortages of everyday goods, and just a lower quality of life. This is where you get those infamous images of people waiting in long lines for basic necessities from. So if it had all these obvious difficulties, why stick with it? Well, the justification for it all hinges on a really profound disagreement about what equality even means. This really gets us to a core philosophical debate. Is fairness about giving everyone a fair starting line, even if it means people end up in different places? That's equality of opportunity. Or is fairness about making sure everyone finishes in the exact same place? That's equality of outcome. And to achieve it, you often have to curtail individual freedoms. And this is where the justification gets locked in. These systems prioritized equality of outcome above all else. They saw it as the only path to true freedom from capitalist exploitation. So the sacrifice of individual economic and political freedom, that was framed as a necessary trade-off to create a truly classless society. So that's the theory. That's the blueprint. But what actually happened when this grand ideological plan collided with the messy complexities of the real world? Let's look at the historical outcome. Well, despite decades of this system and immense human sacrifice, the utopian goal that justified everything, that world without states or classes, filled with abundance for all, it was never achieved. It remained permanently out of reach. And here's the central irony. Instead of getting rid of a powerful ruling class, the system just created a new one. The economic power of the capitalists wasn't transferred to the workers. Instead, it was concentrated in the hands of a new elite, the Communist Party bureaucracy. So at the end of the day, the system that was built to liberate the worker actually resulted in the total subordination of the individual to an all-powerful state. And all this leaves us with a final really big thought. It's a question that echoes throughout history. What is the fundamental tension between trying to achieve collective goals for the good of the group and protecting the liberty of the individual? It's a tough one, and there are no easy answers.
Program is the Active Center. It's created by David Sappe.
Pronounced Seppi.
Pronounced Seppi.